Black Out Loud Media Group. Welcome back to another episode of the Brown Sugar Cafe podcast, the place where poetry meets conversation. I'm your host, Terrence P. Elmore, and before we get into today's topic, make sure you hit that plus sign so you don't miss an episode. Also, please subscribe to my blog, thebrownssugarcafe.blog, and if you find any value in this episode or any other episodes, make sure you leave a heartfelt review. So with that being said, let's get to it. What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the Brown Sugar Cafe podcast. Thank you all for tuning in. If this is your first time, thank you for joining the show. Thank you for being a part of one of my many podcasts. Those of you all who listened to last week's episode, well, not last week, about 2 weeks ago. The last episode. Those of you who listened to the last episode, I had on D. Nicole from Miss Clay, by the way. Be sure to check that one out. Also, check out Black Smoke Barbecue podcast and the newest episode of Past the Remote. We had a really good conversation with Omar Cook, who is an award-winning filmmaker and actor. Also, be sure to check out the rest of Black Out Loud Media Group's podcast. The information is all in the show notes as always. Oh yeah, and before we get started, I just like to say shout out to everyone who pre-ordered my book. The book is officially out now, so hit my website, thebrownssugarcafe.blog, and get your autographed copy. This process has been a very interesting one, a very fun one, and I'm just so excited that it's finally here. So I hope you all enjoy it. I'm going to have an episode on here dedicated to the book. Shout out to Val the Voice Johnsons from Interludes. She gave me that idea, so please be on the lookout for that. So the other day I was thinking, and I had this conversation with my wife, and I was wondering, at a certain point you have to take accountability for your actions, which is very true, because if something happens to us and it leads us down a path that's different from the path that we were going, and we start doing all these negative things we've never done before, at a certain point we have to come to a realization that we are creating our own actions. We are somewhat, and I don't want to say making a choice, but we're somewhat a willing participant in the things that we're doing. But I often wonder, at what point do we expect people to realize and take accountability for their actions? At what point should someone feel like they need to start taking accountability for their actions? Because the truth of the matter is, if they're in that situation or the victim of that situation, they could be living it every day like it just happened. And we're witness to it, and it might have happened 10, 15, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, and it's old to us. They could be replaying that thing fresh in their minds. So I started thinking, when we do that, what about the people who caused those problems to begin with? Are we letting them off the hook? Yes, we have control, so to speak, of our actions and what we do, but it's a lot of people that have been traumatized by somebody else, and the reason why they're acting out is because they're a victim of that situation. And some of these people can't even see it. I mean, you could bring it up to them as many times as you want, tell them that they're hurt and they're just, bitter about a certain situation. And sometimes those people don't even see it themselves because they feel like they've grown past that and healed past it, which, a lot of cases they actually haven't. So I just want us to think about that when we're talking to people, or we're talking about people in their situation, that they may not be there yet. And instead of being judgmental and saying, oh, you're an adult, you need to be accountable for your own actions, are they at a place where they really can be accountable for their own actions? And if not, what help, what resources can we provide for them to get there? I mean, I've talked about this before. Like when it comes to common sense, we like to say, well, common sense should have told you this, common sense should have told you that. But in order for common sense to be a thing, there has to be a common level of understanding. What's common sense to a surgeon is not common sense to a plumber. What's common sense to a plumber might not be common sense to us. So there has to be a certain level of understanding. And then we have to get into a place to where we're willing to have conversations with people, meet them where they are, and help them gain understanding, because everybody doesn't know everything. Even the most brilliant people can learn something from somebody who they think is not as brilliant as them, because we don't know everything. But we have to be willing to have conversations with people who don't see things the same way that we do. That's one of the best ways that you can really educate yourself, because we're not going to reach a point where we stop learning. I mean, truthfully speaking, we learn stuff every day, but why not make it a point to learn something from somebody who sees something from a different perspective? And so back to this, letting the person off the hook. Like, are we letting the people off the hook who've done something wrong, especially when they have done stuff to people by the numbers? When there's groups of people, dozens of people that this person has negatively impacted their lives, are we letting them off the hook? And what are we doing to hold them accountable? Is somebody calling them out about what they did and their actions? I just started thinking about that. There's a certain person that I know, and I see them on social media, and I can tell that they're hurt from a situation that they've been in from childhood to adulthood. And this person says that they're not, but we can clearly see it, right? So like in that situation, and the outlashing and all these different things that are happening that this person doesn't see, but it's very evident that what's going on, the person who caused this outlashing, this frustration, this spew of emotions onto the internet, are we holding them accountable? Are we holding them accountable for the lives that they've negatively affected and the things that they've destroyed? Because and I tried not to kind of bring this up, but I just had to, because I've just been thinking a lot lately about these sort of things when it comes to how people are mistreated, and especially when it comes to when we're talking about God, faith, and religion. A lot of people believe that God isn't real, and it's because the people that misrepresent him are so fake. So if you're supposed to be an example, if you're supposed to be a window into someone believing in God, someone believing in Christ, how are you living your life in such a way that they can see him through you and your actions? Now, none of us are perfect. Not saying that you have to be perfect, but at least be in a place to where when you're misrepresenting, you could be honest and say that this has nothing to do with God. This is just me and my personal issues. Can we get to that point, to being open and honest with people, to saying, I have my own faults, I don't do everything right like I'm supposed to, but I'm trying? Because being a believer doesn't mean you're perfect. It's like some people don't want you to know that. They want you to think that they're perfect and better than everybody else, but that's not true. It doesn't make you perfect. It doesn't make you bulletproof to things that happen in life. It doesn't make you better than anybody. It doesn't make you this great person all of a sudden. Like, it's something, just like everything else, it's something you have to work on every day to improve yourself every day. You're not always going to feel like being kind to people, but guess what? If you're here and you're loud and boisterous about being a believer, then you have to push past those days when you don't feel like being nice to people and be nice to people. Because guess what? You're a representation. You don't get the luxury of having a quote unquote bad day, bad week, bad month. treating people like they don't matter, you don't have that luxury. And another thing that really bothers me is when it comes to family. Like, you have people and their family members aren't living lives that they approve of, and then they'll turn their back on them, right? And then the first thing that happens when they do this is they say, oh, look at my so-called Christian family, because they're hurt, and the association to why you're disowning them or treating them a certain kind of way is because of your beliefs. So how are they not supposed to connect the two? And then get this, they're also seeing you do things that are contrary to what you're telling them. They're watching this, watching all of this unfold. You think you have all these secrets, but everybody knows. You want them to be so perfect, but then you have your flaws as well. These are just things I've been thinking, like, how do they go together? Like, you can't sit there and tell people to act a certain way, but then you're showing them the contrary. Gossiping, doing sneaky stuff behind people's back, treating people the wrong kind of way, taking advantage of people in multiple ways, different type of ways, and without an ounce of care on how you leave them. But they're seeing that, and then you're disowning them because you feel like they've done or said something to offend you, when you're doing stuff to offend people all the time. You think nobody knows about it, but people see it, the people you interact with. And then let's talk about that. When you have your so-called friends, your so-called church family, those folks, right? The people that you're around the most, you all are doing things that are way more messier than what people are experiencing out in the streets. It's people out here who aren't looking for drama. It's people out here who are looking for peace and wholeness. It's a lot of people hurting and empty, and they're sitting here wondering, if I pray to God, will He answer my prayers? If I ask Him to come into my life and change me, will it really happen? And they don't believe that's possible because they look at you. They look at how you treat people. They look at how you talk about people. They look at how you treat them. So you can't get upset with people, how they live lives and do things different than you do, which is something else I want to talk about. We give these formulas to how to get things done, but there's not one formula or one way to get one answer. Take math, for instance. I remember when I was in college, I had algebra in college, right? I already knew algebra and I already knew how to get the answers, but I had this one professor who would dock us points if we didn't get the answer the same way that he taught it. Now, to me and everybody else, this wasn't fair, because why should I have to relearn something that I already know just to please you? Same thing when you're talking to somebody. Why do I have to relearn something just to please you, to do something just to please you without you even taking into consideration my way? Because honestly, it made me feel like he didn't know the way that I did it, so he just cited it as wrong because he couldn't prove that it was correct. But because he was a professor, it was do it my way or it's wrong, because I don't know your way. And I think that's how we approach a lot of things when we talk to people. We're not willing to get an understanding of where they're coming from. We're not willing to get an understanding of what led them to think that way. It's an automatic you're wrong because I'm right. But did we take the time to see how their view could be correct, or how it is correct? Do we approach it as, I'm pretty sure they're right, let me see what they're talking about? In some cases, you can't have conversations with people. I understand that. You try to have a conversation to get an understanding. They think you're being patronizing. They think you're trying to contradict them. You think you're trying to, call them dumb. And it's all about our approach as well. So I understand that, but we have to be willing to try to have conversations with people and try to get an understanding. What did you mean by this? This is how I saw it. How do you see it? Or this is how I normally do it, but show me how you do it. And let's figure out which one actually works better. Or Let's figure out how to combine the two and come up with something even new. So are we having those type of thoughts and those type of conversations? Are we really trying to understand where people are coming from and trying to meet them where they are? Or are we just really expecting them to meet us where we are? And if they don't get on our level, then something is wrong with them. So that's just some things I was thinking about. Just thinking about how people treat each other and how we don't have enough conversations, and we want everybody to grow up fast, and we want everybody to forgive and forget fast and move forward and stop making these mistakes, forgetting that they could be living the trauma every day, every minute, and they don't see a problem. So they don't see anything to correct, especially when somebody's letting the offender off the hook. And everybody's saying, hey, get over it. It happened before, it happened in your past, move on with your life. While this person who did the stuff is getting a pass. And everybody's celebrating that person while they're demonizing you. Have we sat and thought about how that feels to that person and how it could further push them into being deeper in that hole or where they are now? And another thing that I hate is that when people explain something, we automatically call it an excuse because we don't want to hear it. But an explanation is not an excuse. It's an explanation of what happened. And some people feel like they need to explain stuff and over-explain stuff to you because you've already let them know that you don't believe in them. You've already let them know that you have no confidence in what they're saying or what they're doing. And so in turn, they end up explaining and over-explaining things because they need that validation that you actually trust them. But we don't look at it like that. We look at it like just a bunch of excuses. Don't even try to process the information that they're giving us and saying, well, that probably could have happened. No, it's an excuse because, you always have an excuse for something, so it's just another excuse. How often are we doing that instead of just actually listening to what the person has to say and seeing, is it really an excuse? Or are they just giving me information because they feel like I need it? Are we taking the time to do that? Or are we really checking ourselves to see if maybe we're forcing them to feel like they have to give an explanation every time something doesn't go the way that we want it to go? Are we looking at that? So just some things I was thinking about. They kind of tie into each other, they kind of don't. And so I want us to think about those things when we're dealing with people, and people who haven't healed past their issues, and people who are still trying to heal past their issues and trying to get past things that were done to them by other people. And they're seeing that other person being cheered on and celebrated while they're being demonized and ostracized and looked down upon. Let's think about that when we're doing this to people, telling them to get over it. When traumatic things happen to people, that's a form of grief. We're more open to say that we all grieve differently when it comes to death, but are we looking at how a part of that person died inside when whatever happened to them happened? Are we looking at that? So that's what I want us to think about. I want us to think about our level of compassion when it comes to people. What are we doing to be compassionate towards people? Are we practicing compassion towards each other? So I hope I've said something to make you think and reevaluate how we interact with each other. And until next time, keep pushing forward. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of the Brown Sugar Cafe podcast. Once again, I'm your host, Terrence P. Elmore, and this is the place where poetry meets conversation. Hit that follow button and turn on your notifications so you won't miss an episode. Check out my blog, thebrownsugarcafe.blog. Also connect with me on Instagram at thebrownsugarcafe. Hope you enjoyed this episode, and as always, remember, keep pushing forward.